I'm pleased to contribute to the Economic Development and Other Legislation Amendment Bill of 2024, and as a member of the Cost of Living and Economics Committee, I'd like to thank all committee members, but in particular the Secretariat, given the timeframes of such bills now that are being pushed through the House and the enormous amount of work that's being undertaken by the Secretariat. I acknowledge their contribution as well to the report that was tabled. The Queensland Housing Summit that was held in October 2022 had a series of recommendations, of which this was one, which was the reform of Economic Development Queensland to further strengthen its remit to deliver more housing supply across the state. I think the question that beckons, Mr Deputy Speaker, is why was this not seen sooner by the Queensland Government, and why was not this legislation brought forward, and why did it take a housing roundtable and a significant crisis in this state before we saw reform be put forward to this House, almost a decade since Labor's come to power? To achieve its objectives, the bill proposes to amend the Economic Development Act of 2012 to increase housing supply, affordability and diversity by creating new pathways of EDQ to be able to facilitate development. Certainly, we recognise here on this side of the House that there are important levers that government needs to pull to facilitate development, to de-risk development and to ensure supply and diversity of stock across communities, and in particular in my regional communities of Mackay and the Whitsunday. It is important also that there are investment powers that we will see this bill deliver, and activities that will allow the Minister for Economic Development to be able to make significant decisions, and there will be enormous powers associated with this, and the committee certainly did ask many questions of the department to ensure that their new structure that they've proposed as part of the bill will provide the agility and the flexibility that both the Minister and the government of the day will need to enact to be able to facilitate the objectives of the bill. By adjusting the corporate structure, being able to maximise a skill-based board, and I do note many of the submitters were concerned about the makeup of the board and what they see as the expertise that are required to be able to see EDQ align with what would be commercial development, but that would deliver social and affordable housing. I've heard many speak before me about the need and the opportunity that governments had to play when it comes to community and social housing, and that it is a very serious issue. And I'd like to highlight in particular some of the concerns that were raised by submitters, including Local Government Association Queensland. It is important to know that many PDAs across this state, including the one that I led as Deputy Mayor and Chair of the Planning Committee of Mackay Regional Council, that it is the council that takes the significant risk of community consultation and engagement when they embark upon a PDA. It is extensive community consultation and it is expensive. It is an investment in the local community because those regional councils understand what their community needs. So when government decides to undertake a major reform and decides to do that in a period that local councils were in caretaker mode, Mr Deputy Speaker, and throughout that time as well, we saw a significant change in local government leadership across this state, where even EDQ recognised the capacity would need to be built further in local councils to understand what the opportunities are in the review of the PDAs to be able to facilitate greater investment in social and community housing. Certainly, Mr Deputy Speaker, I heard the Chair talk about it being a serious issue. Community housing and social housing in our regions is a very serious issue. And when I was elected to this House, Mr Deputy Speaker, I had held positions on our local community housing board, Mackay Community Housing Company, Connect Housing, where I had sought meetings with the then Minister Enoch, who had failed to sign off on agreements between the local council, the community housing provider and the state that we have now seen since Minister Scanlon signed off, but it has taken almost a decade to sign off on that. And what's happened in that time, Mr Deputy Speaker, is opportunity cost, a loss of opportunity by the community housing provider to be able to embark upon renewal, investment The price of construction has skyrocketed, and we have not now seen the full capacity of what the community housing sector could have delivered in my region of Mackay had this Labor government not have been dragged kicking and screaming, who was so risk adverse, to be able to invest and collaborate with the community housing sector. I am frankly tired, Mr Deputy Speaker, of the lip service that has been paid by those opposite, in particular the new Premier, who was the former State Development Minister, who oversaw what now we've seen a minister take action quite swiftly, and that is why the opposition is supporting this bill, because we know that these are some of the levers that government can pull that can help facilitate development in regional areas. I'd like to highlight some of the concerns also that were raised, in particular around third-party agreements to deliver social and affordable housing. The Planning Institute of Australia, Urban Development Institute of Australia certainly support third-party agreements. This is about enhancing EDQ's ability to be able to ensure that affordable and social housing targets could be met and that they can be facilitated as part of development within PDAs. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's important that they raised, along with the LGAQ, the EDQ should not be a competitor with industry. It should complement industry. It should be a facilitator, and it should de-risk where it can and provide investment assurity and security. There is lots of opportunity, Mr Deputy Speaker, when we look at regional areas like mine across Mackay and the Whitsundays, and they include projects like Whitsunday Paradise, Hidden Valley Estate, older developments in Cannon Valley, in the northern beaches at Shoal Point Waters, retirement villages that want to go into my community of Bakasia, but it is the infrastructure investment, the trunk infrastructure investment is an impediment to council, it's an impediment to private development, it's an impediment to sustainable development, and it is where we need to partner with the state government, and we need investment by state government into very expensive pieces of infrastructure like drainage, like ensuring that our transport corridors are invested in a way that is kept up with growth and that help facilitate development and livability. Mr Deputy Speaker, I urge Economic Development Queensland and the Minister that oversees the organisation and their board as part of their new structure that they certainly need to identify where there are failings when it comes to planning instruments, when it comes to LGIPs and local government infrastructure plans, and in particular where we've seen a failure in regional plans. They have not kept up to date to help facilitate facilitate development. And when we look at many of the planning schemes and many of the PDAs that have been sitting around this state for decades without development occurring, one has to ask the question why. Because this government has not invested in strategic economic infrastructure like roads, like drainage, like flood mitigation in areas where there is high need for housing, where there is industry, like the mining sector of the Bowen Basin, where there are tourism jobs in my region of the Whitsundays, and we've not seen planning, development and investment by this state government keep up with what demand is that we are feeling across our region. This legislation, Mr Deputy Speaker, will also introduce place renewal areas and place renewal frameworks. It will allow the compulsory acquisition of land, and I note my colleague and the Deputy Chair, the member for Mermaid's, concerns that were raised by many around compulsory acquisition and also the significant direction of powers, and in particular the direction around infrastructure charges and what that means to industry. This Labor government has failed to deliver on its responsibility of social and community housing. When we look at the data and the wait list, it is evident. When we look at legislation that is being passed right before an election, because no one had the foresight to pass this legislation years before, where levers could have been pulled by Economic Development Queensland to help facilitate and fast-track social and community housing, Mr Deputy Speaker, it is not the fault of those in the department. It is the lack of leadership by those ministers and the now Premier before them who have failed Queenslanders.
Deputy Speaker.